Hello everyone, welcome to the React development tutorial. In this tutorial, we will talk about forms in React, how we submit the form and how we listen for the changes. So these are the things that are included. We simply create a React bootstrap form, and then we handle any action when the form is submitted, or also we look for any changes that we have for the form. Okay, here is the final product for this tutorial. I will show it in advance so you'll get some idea what we are going to learn. It's a very simple form. On the right hand side, I just opened the developers tool. So you have to go right click in Chrome and hit inspect, and then you go to the console tab. So in this form, we will have a label, we'll have an input field and a button. So as soon as I type something, for example, it is listening for any kind of changes, and it just reflects and console log here. It says field value is I. So if I keep typing, it will update the console. So it means that it is listening for any kind of changes for this input field. And also if I submit the form, it says submitted value is this value. So we're going to learn how we do this. Let's do that. In this tutorial, we learn how to add a component from Bootstrap. So let me zoom in a little bit. As you can see, there is only one button on the screen. So we can just remove this button and add our form. So how do we do that? First, we can just go to Bootstrap and grab a form. So where is the form? So if you go to the website that I initially mentioned, react.bootstrap.netlify.app, and then search for forms, and it will bring up this part. So these are the form elements, and you can just easily copy paste this part and then copy in your application. So you can do it in the middle of the app, or you can just remove this, delete this button, and add it here. So since we only need one portion, one field, we can just keep this part and remove the last part because this is not needed. As you can see inside of this view, it has email and password. We just need one field, so we can just remove this portion of it. So it will not require the password. So I will remove this part, but I keep the submit button since we need it later. And first, also we have to import this form because this form is not there before. So now let's modify the rest. What else we need? These are the class names that it adds some styling part. Instead of email, this is not the email field for us. It will be a to-do item. To-do item. This is the label that I would suggest to add. A placeholder for it, it's not email. And you know what is placeholder? Placeholder is something that it's, for example, it types email, enter email. So our placeholder will be enter your to-do item, and so we can have some text underneath the field. So for our case, we don't need that, so we can just get rid of it for the sake of simplicity of the form. And then we will have a submit button. So I would prefer to have everything in one line. It's not a very big one, and I think that's it. In terms of a form, the way that it should look like, that's it. So we can just run it and see how it looks like. Let's run it. Okay, I ran npm start, and that is what you see when you run the application. So we'll have a label, a field, and a button. So currently, if you type something here, you will not see anything in the console tab, but we will add it later. But if you click on the submit button, if you notice, so let me remove this. It will refresh the page. So we want to prevent this by just simply remove the submit type here. So we will handle the submit button differently, but if you have a form and then you have a button and the type is submit, every time you click on submit, it will refresh the page. So in our applications, we have to do refresh as less as possible in order to keep it very efficient and responsive. So just keep in mind, I just removed this type. Let me remove it again and save it. But this time, I can just remove the things. This time, if I click on submit, nothing happens and it will not refresh the page. And one more thing here, in our email, the type is email, but we have to change it to text. The reason that we have to change it to text is because when I try to submit something, it was looking for email validations. It was saying that the email should have @.com or something like that. So we have to remove the type here and instead of email say text, because for our to-do item it's a free text field and we don't need these kind of validations. And I think that's it. We can now add our more complex items like on change handler and on submit handler. Let's do that. Now next thing that we want to do is when they type something, when we detect some changes, we add something to the console. So how do we do that? This is the field that we have. The input field is added like this. So this is the label for it, and this is the actual input field. So we can just add a field called, I can just add these into a different line. Since we zoomed in, we cannot see everything in one line, just to better readability. So I can just add, there's something called onChange. So you can see if I put in equal, so I can add a function here that every time a field has changed, it will call that function. So I can call this function handle on change. I have not added that function yet, but I'll just name it first, input. So what it does, every time we have some change, it will call this function. How do we define this function? We can just define it right here. So we can define it as a constant value. A constant is for defining a variable that you cannot change later. So this variable is basically a function, and I will use the ES6 shorthand version of function. This will be a function. So every time we have a change, it will call this function. And what do we do in this function? We just simply do console log, and we type something here. So some change happened. So now if I can type, now if I go back to my application and type something, if I refresh it and start typing something, see, it says some changes happen. So it's calling our console log. Okay, now the next step is to get the field value, and whenever they type something, we add it to the console. So when they type, for example, letter A, we see it in the console, and by console I mean right here. So how do we do that? We use React hooks. And how do we use React hooks? Don't confuse the name, it might sound difficult, but all you have to do, you just say use state, you import this hook, and then the way that you use it is, since you have some input field, you use it like this. You say, you define a variable. Basically, by defining a variable, you want the input field, and you want to set this input field. So set input. So now we can use the state, and the text field here is text, and the initial value is empty string. So D, sorry. So input field, set input field, and we use the state to set this text as a state, And where do we use it? We define a value right here for our input field, and we set it to input field dot text, and then we can use this in here. Okay, set input field, and we can set our text, basically the text state that we defined right here. You also have to define an event, and what is this event? It's whenever you type something, you get that type event, and then it gets the target, and it gets also the value out of that target. Why we have some red stuff here? It's because we're using TypeScript. For now, for the sake of simplicity, I just use type any. It means that the type of this event could be anything, but if you want to do some real programming, you just have to give it some typed variable in order to have a safe programming. So yeah, all we have to do here is defining the use state, importing the use state, which is the React hooks, and then in here I just define the state called text, and this text, I use this value of the text in my input, and every time it changes I set this text to the target, and this way I can now console log the input field instead of this constant text that we have. I can just console log input field.text. So if I save this and go back here, this time every time I type something, it is showing what I typed. That's all. Okay, the last part that we need to implement is submit. So whenever they click on submit button, we have to send what is the input field text value. So how do we do that? So we said that we have a submit button here. So there is an event that we can add to it, like this one that we added in the different lines for better readability. So we can do the same thing here. And on this button, we can just add on click. So if you remember, for the previous one, we used on change because it was an input field. We wanted to detect any kind of change for this field. For this one, we want to detect the click. So whenever they click on this button, we want to do something. So we say handle click, handle on click. So we have to implement it. The way that we do that is the same way that we define the variable const like above here. So we do the same thing, and we can call a function, which is a ES6 syntax for it, short version of calling the function. And all we have to do so is the console log, and we can just say input field text, input field.text. Basically whatever we had here, we can add it here as well, but this time we add it under the click event. So if I save it and go back here, this time if I hit submit, as you can see, the number goes up because I'm clicking constantly, so it adds it to the console. So if I change the value to whatever it is and then hit submit, it submits it to the console log. And one more piece that makes the submit button look better is whenever we're done and they click on this submit button, we want to clear this field. So how do we do that? It's very easy. We can just set input field that we had like this. So this time when we console log, instead of setting the target, we can just set it back to empty string. So when they click something, we set the field back to the empty string. because they need to type something else. So now if I refresh the page, so they type something and they submit, it clears the form and we have nothing to submit. And we can see it still do the console log. We can add some logic that if we have some value, then do the submit button. So this is handle click. So if we see there is some input field text, we can just simply do this. And by doing this, we are saying that if the input text field has some value, then set it to the empty string or do the console log. So we can do the same thing here. This and sign means that if we have, it's kind of like an if statement. If we have something in the input field, then do the console log, or then set the input field. Otherwise, don't do it. The simple form of it, we can just say from the if statement. If I want to do the if statement, it will look like this. Like this. I can put both of them in here to make it simple. Oh, sorry. So I can get rid of these. So if you have some text, then do the console log. So now if I save it, if I do this and submit, see, I'm clicking, but nothing happens because there's no value here. But if you have some value and hit submit, it adds it to the console. But the next time I try to click, I swear to God I'm clicking, but nothing happens in the console. So that's all for this tutorial. We just learned how to detect the changes on input field and how to handle click event for the button. So these are necessary for the next step of this tutorial set for React development. Have a great day.